Dicamba-resistant water hemp discovered, confirmed in the state of Missouri. That's not good news. But we do have some other pretty good news today. You're listening to The Farm Show. That's Farm and Ranch, Missouri, here on Westplex Talk 104.5. I'm your host, John Combest. I got to tell you, we had the show planned out, completely planned out on Thursday, and then President Donald Trump dropped some news on a topic we've discussed for months on this show, and we got to throw the whole script out the window. It is Saturday, December 20th. We're on the eve of the winter solstice. What a great day. 2025. Did I mention that? It's 2025. Here's what we'll be talking about today. Here in our first segment, which we call A Block, we're going to be talking about Dicamba-resistant water hemp. Who identified it? Who confirmed it? What do you need to know? And what might it have to do with the Dicamba label for 2026? From there, we got to talk about the Trump issue. We have to talk about hemp, marijuana, reclassification of cannabis. We're going to play a throwback clip from a couple months ago when we talked about what exactly a rescheduling of marijuana would mean for hemp growers and the industry. As you know, we've talked extensively on this show about the fact that there are some hemp growers in our broadcast area, and there are even more folks than that are considering getting into the hemp industry. In our second and third segments today, which we call B and C Block, we will be playing select excerpts from my very favorite show in the state of Missouri, and that's This Week in Missouri Politics. More specifically, This Week in Missouri Politics TWMP Daily host Scott Fawn sat down with the newly elected vice president of the Missouri Farm Bureau, Andy Clay. And Scott and Andy talked about glyphosate, they talked about Roundup, they talked about the new Missouri Farm Bureau health plans, a whole gamut of issues. So we'll get to that in our second and our third segment of the day. Let's start off with that water hemp topic, though. I'm going to read to you a few excerpts from a piece from the Progressive Farmer. Don't hold the name against it. Progressive Farmer. And the reporter's name is Jason Jenkins. Here's his headline: Dicamba-resistant water hemp in Missouri. Confirmed in Missouri is the subhead. Missouri has joined the list of states where at least one population of water hemp has been declared resistant to dicamba herbicide. During the University of Missouri Crop Management Conference this week, MU Extension weed scientist Kevin Bradley announced that his lab had recently determined that a population of the troublesome weed species collected in 2023 from a field in Saline County in west central Missouri was resistant to dicamba. This means that the plants could not be killed with a labeled rate of the herbicide and showed a significant differential in response when compared to plants from a known susceptible population. Mr. Jenkins goes on to quote Kevin Bradley here: I don't think that this is any grand announcement because, quite frankly, I think we've had dicamba resistance in water hemp already in this state. It just hadn't been confirmed. Mr. Jenkins goes on to write, with the confirmation from Bradley's lab, Missouri becomes the fourth state to officially identify a dicamba-resistant water hemp population. Populations were documented in 2021 in Illinois and Tennessee, and in 2023 in Iowa. Dr. Bradley goes on to tell Mr. Jenkins in an interview, which, by the way, you can find at dtnpf.com. Think dtnprogressivefarmer.com. Dr. Bradley says, we've been looking at it in the greenhouse since May. We did a couple runs and we feel like it's dicamba resistant. It was still susceptible to glufosinate and 2,4-D. That's a pretty important note. The news of the latest dicamba-resistant weed population comes as EPA considers thousands of public comments generated by the agency's proposed decision this past summer to approve the unconditional re-registration of 3 over-the-top dicamba products intended to intended to control broadleaf weeds post-emergence in dicamba-tolerant soybeans and cotton. Mr. Jenkins goes on to write, those products, and then he lists BASF's Ingenia, Bayer's Extendamax, etc., had previously received conditional 5-year registrations in October 2020, but those labels were vacated in February 2024 by a federal court in Arizona that determined the agency had violated FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, by approving the registrations. And then Mr. Jenkins goes on to talk a little bit about the legal minutia. We'll skip that in the interest of time today. Farmers in 2024 were allowed to use the herbicides under an existing stock order, but OTT dicamba was unavailable to soybean and cotton farmers this past growing season. So in 2025, as you probably know, you couldn't use dicamba over the top in soybeans and cotton. Mr. Jenkins goes on to write, while Bradley characterized the discovery of dicamba-resistant water hemp in Missouri as, quote, no big surprise, end quote, he told the conference attendees that it's relevant because in his estimation, there's strong likelihood that OTT dicamba products could be back on the market in 2026, providing opportunity for more resistance to develop. The weed scientist urged the audience to look beyond post-emerge herbicides and adopt integrated pest strategies and new technologies for weed control. Dr. Bradley goes on to say, I don't go out actively trying to find these resistant weeds, but when we find them, it's a good lesson to show growers that it's real and it can happen. I really encourage you to use 2 or 3 effective modes of action on our pre-emergence herbicides. Dr. Bradley goes on to say, whether it's Palmer amaranth down south or water hemp in the Midwest and beyond, we have resistance to just about every herbicide solution now. If it can happen in one place, it can happen anywhere. Mr. Jenkins concludes his piece by saying, the Getting Rid of Weeds, or GROW Network, is a scientist-led organization helping farmers with a greater diversity of weed control strategies to complement chemical use. Learn more by going to GROW IWM, so think Integrated Weed Management .org. That's growiwm.org. I'd also point you to a piece at Brownfield Ag News, which you can find at brownfieldagnews.com, by Kara Hart this week, covering the same topic. I use Mr. Jenkins' piece here from the Progressive Farmer because it's a little bit more in detail. And again, you can find Mr. Jenkins' piece by going to dtnpf.com. Okay, so that's water hemp in the state of Missouri. But what about another type of hemp? Cannabis. We've talked about it a bunch on the show. And this week on Thursday, President Donald Trump signed an executive order dealing with the rescheduling of marijuana. This will affect growers in our broadcast area and growers who are thinking about growing hemp in 2026. We'll go to the select audio of President Trump's press conference. I'll play just a snippet of that right now.
I want to emphasize that the order I am about to sign is not the legalization, or it doesn't legalize marijuana in any way, shape, or form, and in no way sanctions its use as a recreational drug. It has nothing to do with it. Just as the prescription painkillers may have legitimate uses, but can also do irreversible damage and never, if you look at some of the damage that can be caused, wreck lives, and if it's abused, it's never safe to use powerful controlled substances in recreational manners, and especially in this case, if you take a look, illegal and unregulated drugs, very, very bad thing. So I've always told my children, don't take drugs, no drinking, no smoking, and just stay away from drugs. I have been, they would look at me and they said, Dad, would you stop saying that? I would say it every time I looked at it practically. Young Americans are especially at risk, so unless a drug is recommended by a doctor for medical reasons, just don't do it. At the same time, the facts compel the federal government to recognize that marijuana can be legitimate in terms of medical applications when carefully administered in some cases. This may include the use as a substitute for addictive and potentially lethal opioid painkillers, and they cause tremendous problems. This can do it in a much lesser way, can make people feel much better that are living through tremendous pain and problems. 40 states and multiple U.S. territories have already recognized the use of medical marijuana. This reclassification order will make it far easier to conduct marijuana-related medical research, allowing us to study benefits, potential dangers, and future treatments. It's going to have a tremendously positive impact, I believe. We're also asking Congress to reconsider its classification of hemp-derived CBD to ensure seniors can access CBD products they have found beneficial for pain and other reasons. Some people are literally dying, and they're dying with tremendous pain, and this can, in many cases, literally stop it.
Okay, we're going to pause the president's comments there. The entire press conference went on about 40 minutes, but I think particularly toward the end there, you heard President Trump talk about the benefits of these hemp-derived products. If you're just joining us, you're listening to The Farm Show. That's Farm and Ranch, Missouri, on Westplex Talk 104.5. What we'll do now is we'll go back to early November, in which we had Missouri's cannabis expert, Eapen Thampy, on the show. I asked Eapen about the upcoming rumored executive order rescheduling cannabis. And here's what Eapen had to say. Previously, you've mentioned the absurdity of one plant being regulated in two different ways. And you've also mentioned the fact that you think that a lot of the regulation should be coming from the federal government. Can you explain where we are in terms of federal regulation and perhaps some sort of rescheduling?
Yeah, absolutely. So hemp is cannabis that is tested before harvest and is determined to have less than 0.3% delta 9 THC or tetrahydrocannabinol. Marijuana is cannabis that has more than that 0.3% cutoff. So for 100 years, marijuana and hemp have been federally illegal. And then in 2018, President Trump removed the hemp classification from federal drug scheduling, and that kind of led to a federally legal interstate commerce model of cannabis, right, which is where I represent a lot of companies and interests. With marijuana, however, marijuana continues to be Schedule 1. Now, President Trump, during his election, committed to advancing a process of rescheduling marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which would make it legal by prescription. So my latest communications from folks with, at the White House level indicates that, President Trump and his team are looking at all the options, and they kind of see this the same way. This is bizarre that we have marijuana and hemp that represents two different classifications of the same plant. We have state regulations in a lot of places for marijuana that constitute licensing monopolies. They're looking to kind of thread a needle in terms of what they want to tell the Attorney General and the DEA to do in terms of reclassification. And then Congress, we expect, it's a current topic now with, unfortunately, there's some language in the agriculture appropriations minibus that is concerning to us, but assuming we get past that, and want to thank U.S. Senator Rand Paul for his leadership on that issue. Assuming we get past government funding issue that's plaguing everyone for other reasons right now, we anticipate Congress brings up the marijuana hemp regulatory issue probably in February or March.
There's been some really good journalism done on the local level. So, for example, Chris Parker from the Washington Missourian has done a number of pieces on the hemp space, even talking to local hemp growers. If you're a hemp grower out there and you've thought of putting a few acres into hemp production, you might have even done the research on fertility and soil testing and harvesting equipment, and you haven't yet pulled the trigger. In your opinion, Eapen, what's something that would cause
a potential hemp grower to actually pull the trigger in the coming years and move forward with planting hemp?
So the plant gives you three things. It gives you seed, it gives you flower, which is where the cannabinoid-rich resins are extracted, whether it's CBD or THC or another cannabinoid molecule, and it gives you fiber, right? So the fiber and seed parts of the plant are where the future commodity status of this market lie, because fiber products can be used for everything from textiles to paper. You can actually make a kind of a graphene out of hemp fiber that is a very high value, product for the electronics market. There's like thousands of potential industrial applications for hemp fiber. Problem there is that America is just beginning to do the genetic optimization for fiber hemp that needs to happen in terms of like directing a specific genetic for a specific industrial use. The other problem there is processing and infrastructure, because America doesn't do a ton of its own processing of industrial processing anymore, and you need to like build the whole machine from scratch in terms of having the harvesting, having the processing equipment, and human labor and human capital to run those things, right? So we're at the very beginning of the emergence of that market space. The other possibility for the ordinary farmer is the nutrition market with the hemp seed, right? You go to a Schnucks or a Hy-Vee or whatever, you'll find hemp seed in the specialty foods aisle, but it's beginning to get them a little bit more exposure in a lot of places. And the FDA just approved hemp seed for layer chickens as a feed additive, which is actually use that Missouri was. Missouri produced a lot of bird seed, from hemp seed 100 years ago. So it's a historic industry for Missouri. The animal nutrition market is going to be huge, because the hemp seed is a whole protein, has all your basic vitamins and minerals, and is just very nutritious, right? So it's a clean source of protein for all of your production animals. And again, for all the fiber and hemp potential uses, that farmer would have to find good genetics. You'd have to have harvesting, protocols and equipment to handle the crop. You'd have to have a destination, right? Once you get it to the farm gate, someone's got to be able to come and pick it up and write you a check. Developing this commodity space is very challenging, but I've had a front row seat to this whole emergent industry space for the last 10 years, and it's incredibly exciting. So right now, for most farmers, you're beginning to see companies that will put a fulfillment contract on your acreage for hemp fiber or seed. So it's beginning to be viable. So, obviously the best way to do this is find a company that will give you that fulfillment contract and work with them to establish the rest of the process. And it's going to be something that 2 or 3 years to for the farmer to learn the crop anyway. So, start small, start with 5 acres, 10, 20 next year, 50, 100, year 3. And then after that, you're probably in a position to substantially expand, hopefully.
Okay, that was Eapen Thampy from the November 1st episode of The Farm Show. You can find that by going to Farm Show Radio on YouTube. When we come back, we will hear excerpts of an interview that our friend Scott Fawn did with the new Vice President of the Missouri Farm Bureau, Andy Clay. You're listening to The Farm Show on Westplex Talk 104.5. We'll be right back.